Imagine, if you will, that we have access to brand new exclusive photographs from the depths of the Atlantic. Images from the wreck of the Titanic unlike any seen before. When the first grainy pictures of the Titanic's final resting place emerged in September of 1985, the world stood still, captivated. People sat transfixed before their television screens, watching the legendary ship reappear from the abyss after more than 70 years of watery slumber. Where did the Titanic meet its end, you might ask? The answer lies approximately 400 miles off the rugged coastline of Newfoundland, Canada. There, in complete and utter darkness, the so-called unsinkable ship rests at a crushing depth of roughly 1,800 feet below the surface. Even after such a long, harrowing plunge to the ocean floor, the front section, the bow, appears surprisingly well preserved. The railings are still visible, as are the massive anchor chains. The elegant curves of the hull are still recognizable, echoing the grandeur captured in old photographs. But back then, news reports rarely mentioned the stern of the ship, and there's a very good reason why we still hear relatively little about it. These initial images weren't simply about capturing mesmerizing ghostly footage. They provided tangible, undeniable proof of what really happened when the Titanic sank on that fateful night in 1912. We were finally beginning to piece together the truth of this maritime disaster, a tragedy in which over 1,600 souls perished. And before you reach for your search engine to find out how many people survived the sinking of the Titanic, let me tell you, 706. Among those fortunate survivors, several vividly recalled seeing the ship break apart as it descended into the depths. Others vehemently insisted that it sank as a single unbroken piece. Initially, investigators sided with the latter group. Official reports concluded that the Titanic had indeed gone down intact. For 73 long years, this remained the accepted narrative. Then, the underwater photographs of the Titanic were revealed, and they confirmed the unthinkable. The great liner had indeed broken apart as it sank beneath the waves. If those initial images showed the relatively intact bow, it stood to reason that the stern must be located somewhere nearby, right? Well, yes and no. It was eventually found, resting approximately 2,000 feet away from the bow, scattered across the ocean floor. So, it exists, but why is it that no one ever talks about the stern of the Titanic? The answer lies in its condition. The bow, despite the immense damage sustained upon impact with the seabed, remains largely recognizable. Many of its interiors are surprisingly well preserved, and it rests in a position that suggests it is still sailing on its intended course. The stern, however, is a scene of utter devastation. Today, it resembles a mangled, twisted heap of steel, barely recognizable as part of a ship. Only the most robust components, such as the massive propellers, the reciprocating engines, and the rudder, have managed to retain their original forms. The rest of the stern section is slowly dissolving into the seafloor, becoming one with the abyss. To truly understand the horrific state of the stern, we must journey back to that frigid night of April 15th, 1912, the night of the Titanic's demise. Just hours before the tragedy unfolded, the Titanic was slicing smoothly through the icy waters of the North Atlantic. The stern was a hive of activity, filled with people, families conversing, music playing, life proceeding as usual. This section housed the cabins for passengers with the most affordable tickets. The third-class travelers, also known as steerage passengers. But the stern was more than just passenger accommodations. It also contained many of the ship's vital storage areas, including the cavernous cargo holds, the baggage rooms, the bustling kitchens, the crew quarters, and even the intricate engineering spaces. Keep that information in mind, as it will become crucial in understanding what happened next. Let's fast forward to the moment when the mighty liner struck the iceberg. As the bow began its inexorable descent, the stern slowly rose out of the water, placing unimaginable stress on the midsection of the ship. Around 2 a.m., the lights on the Titanic flickered ominously and then plunged the ship into darkness. Moments later, with a sound that echoed across the water, the ship broke in two. The bow vanished beneath the waves. The stern briefly settled back onto the surface before rising once again, this time assuming a near-vertical position. It remained upright for what seemed like an eternity, and then began its final terrifying plunge. At approximately 2:20 a.m., the stern disappeared beneath the surface of the Atlantic. The Titanic was gone. Beneath the waves, two vastly different scenarios were unfolding. The bow, slowly filling with water, began to drift downward, almost sailing gracefully like a submarine. As a result, it managed to maintain its structural integrity and remain largely intact. The fate of the Titanic's stern, however, was a completely different story. The stern was ripped apart at the point where the ship had fractured. Water surged in through this gaping opening at an unbelievable rate. This catastrophic flooding caused the stern to plummet downwards far more rapidly than the bow. The sheer force of the water created such violent turbulence that pieces of the ship were torn off and scattered across the ocean floor. Remember those vast storage areas within the stern? They were now wide open, and many of them still contained pockets of air. When the stern section broke away, these compartments still filled with air. Imagine, if you will, the chaotic scene aboard the ill-fated Titanic. Charles Joan, the ship's chief baker, lay asleep in his bunk. Suddenly, the jarring impact of the iceberg jolted him awake. Without hesitation, he sprang into action, dispatching his team of bakers to distribute bread to the lifeboats. A man of duty, even in the face of impending doom. He then briefly retreated to his quarters for a fortifying drink, a final moment of normalcy before the unfolding tragedy. Re-emerging onto the deck, Jochen tirelessly assisted passengers into the lifeboats. But as the final boats were lowered, there was no space left for him. Undeterred, he clung to the exterior rails of the sinking behemoth. As the Titanic succumbed to the icy depths, he found himself plunged into the frigid water. Yet against all odds, he swam. As the first rays of dawn pierced the horizon, he spotted a lifeboat and was pulled to safety by the crew of the Carpathia. One can only speculate that the contents of his flask played a role in his improbable survival. In stark contrast, consider the actions of Benjamin Guggenheim, a wealthy American businessman. A man of refinement and dignity, Guggenheim chose a different path. Accompanied by his valet, his French singer companion Lentine, her maid, and their chauffeur, Guggenheim had boarded the Titanic during its stop in France. As the catastrophe unfolded, he dedicated himself to ensuring the safety of the women, offering them what would become tragically false assurances that they would meet again the next day, confident the ship would be swiftly repaired. Having assisted countless women and children into the lifeboats, Guggenheim made a conscious decision not to vie for a remaining seat. Instead, he and his valet retreated from the chaotic decks to their luxurious first-class suite. There, they donned their finest evening attire, choosing to face their end with unwavering composure and grace, like true gentlemen. The Royal Mail ship Titanic, or RMS Titanic, an icon of its era, was once a symbol of opulence and the boundless promise of dreams realized. Its construction demanded 3 long years and the labor of over 3,000 workers. On April 10, 1912, the brand-new ocean liner welcomed its passengers with the distinct aroma of fresh varnish, paint, and newly sawn wood. In that era, lead was still commonly used in paint production, with linseed oil as a binder, resulting in a potent and unforgettable olfactory experience. Once fully operational, this colossal vessel devoured an astounding 850 tons of coal each day, filling the air with the acrid smell of its fumes. Another fragrance that permeated the Titanic's decks, particularly in the first-class areas, was the new scent from the renowned French perfume house Guerlain. Launched earlier that year, it swiftly became a favorite among affluent women. This perfume, still available today, is a blend of violets and iris, underscored by a creamy vanilla base. On the fateful evening of April 14th, with the Titanic mere hours from its demise, oblivious waiters served an extravagant menu to the first-class passengers. Oysters, lamb with mint sauce, roast duck with applesauce, and other delicacies graced their tables. Meanwhile, in second class, the air was filled with the tempting aromas of curried chicken, spring lamb, and roast turkey. Third-class passengers, however, dined on simpler fare: gruel and biscuits. Around 11 p.m., as the ship sailed perilously close to the fateful iceberg, a new and ominous scent joined the mix, a mineral odor with metallic undertones. Much like ice in a refrigerator absorbs the smells of nearby food, icebergs carry the odors of the sea creatures and retain the chemical composition of the water from which they formed. Had more people recognized the significance of this particular metallic smell, it might not have saved the ship, but it could have increased the number of lives saved. Speaking of smells, if you've ever wondered what space smells like, but lack plans to become an astronaut, you can experience Ode to Space, an aroma designed by NASA decades ago. This perfume was created to prepare astronauts for the sensory experience of space during training. While space is a vacuum and technically shouldn't have a smell, astronauts who have ventured beyond our atmosphere recall a pleasant metallic odor, akin to welding fumes or burnt gunpowder. They detected this scent on their spacesuits upon returning to the spacecraft. We can also speculate about the scents of other planets based on their atmospheric composition. Venus, shrouded in clouds of sulfuric acid, likely smells of rotten eggs. Mars and Uranus share this unpleasant odor. Jupiter's atmosphere, composed of distinct chemical layers, offers a range of smells depending on the altitude. Some layers might greet you with the delicious aroma of bitter almonds or marzipan, while others closer to the top smell like cleaning products. The remaining planets in our solar system are unlikely to have strong scents due to the prevalence of odorless gases in their atmospheres. As for the Moon, Apollo astronauts reported that its dust smells like gunpowder. That perfectly manicured lawn. It seems harmless, right? Almost worth the sweat and effort. But let's consider things from another perspective. Did you ever stop to consider that your lawn is actually suffering as you mow it? Imagine it, if you will, silently screaming for help. Because grass lacks the ability to vocalize its distress, it resorts to chemical communication, releasing a cocktail of pungent volatile molecules. This isn't just random. It's a defense mechanism against ravenous insects. Caterpillars, for instance, are particularly fond of those sugary plant snacks. When the lawnmower blades descend, the grass unleashes jasmonic acid, among other compounds. Think of it as a distress signal, a beacon to parasitic wasps, announcing a caterpillar buffet. These wasps then deal with the offending herbivores, allowing the grass to recover and thrive. From the grass's point of view, mowing is akin to a full-scale insect invasion, triggering its survival instincts. Now, let's talk about rain, that refreshing downpour. It possesses a distinct and evocative aroma, known as petrichor. Where does this earthy scent originate? It turns out certain plants secrete oils, especially during periods of drought. These oils accumulate on rocks and in the soil. When raindrops fall, they interact with these accumulated oils, liberating them into the air. Sometimes these oils mingle with chemicals produced by soil-dwelling bacteria, resulting in that familiar musky odor that permeates forests and gardens after a rainfall. Ozone also contributes to the scent of rain, particularly after thunderstorms. The electrical discharge from lightning splits oxygen and nitrogen molecules in the atmosphere, which then recombine to form ozone. One intriguing theory suggests that our fondness for the smell of rain is deeply ingrained in our brains. Across cultures, rain has always been associated with positive connotations, a perception we may have inherited. Attention, chocolate aficionados! Prepare for a delightful surprise. There exist flowers that exude the unmistakable fragrance of your beloved chocolate. After all, chocolate originates from a tropical plant. While replicating the exact magical scent of chocolate in a perfume remains elusive, you can cultivate your own chocolate-scented garden by planting chocolate flowers, also known as Berlandiera lirata. These flowers resemble daisies, with vibrant yellow petals encircling a deep red center. When you pluck a petal, the flower releases that irresistible chocolate aroma. Even the leaves and branches of the plant share the same delightful fragrance. Should you be intrigued, you can find these flowers thriving in the arid soils of Arizona, Texas, Colorado, and other states with similar climates. They bloom year-round, with the aroma most potent on warm days. The bear cat, also known as the binturong, Arctictis binturong, isn't just undeniably adorable. It also smells remarkably like buttered popcorn. These creatures prefer solitude, employing their distinctive aroma to mark their territory and attract potential mates when necessary. Scientists have been captivated by the bear cat's unusual scent, initially suggesting it might stem from secretions from scent glands located beneath the animal's tail. Further investigation revealed that the popcorn smell actually originates from the bear cat's urine. As the animal relieves itself, it leaves a scented trail on trees, often soaking its tail in the process. But if real popcorn requires heat to release its enticing aroma, how do bear cats achieve this without a microwave? The answer may lie in their diet, or perhaps more likely, in the bacteria that interact with the animal's natural fluids. Durian, a fruit immensely popular in Southeast Asia, presents an olfactory paradox. Some find its scent sweet and appealing, while the majority perceive it as a pungent blend of rotten onions and sweaty socks. The stench is so overpowering that it's banned on public transportation and in hotels in certain countries. The secret of durian lies in its 44 odor-active components. The complexity of this mixture makes it impossible to predict the resulting aroma. Despite its often repulsive smell, durian is considered a delicacy and is used in a variety of predominantly sweet dishes, such as cakes and candies. A particularly memorable smelly incident involving durian occurred at a library in Australia. The odor of rotting fruit emanating from a cupboard permeated the entire building through the air conditioning system. Mistaking it for a gas leak, authorities evacuated approximately 500 students and teachers. A truly unfortunate situation. Finally, if you've ever visited natural hot springs or witnessed the spectacle of geysers, you'll never forget the smell of hydrogen sulfide, or less poetically, rotten eggs. While undeniably unpleasant and highly flammable, it can also be quite useful. In Iceland, for example, many households utilize geothermal springs as a source of hot water. Despite its less than fresh aroma, the water is perfectly safe to drink, and the smell doesn't linger on your skin after a shower. The Titanic. The name conjures images of grandeur, tragedy, and countless stories retold, even immortalized in film. But now, we have something unprecedented. Its first full-size digital scan. And no, it's not like those models from before. Imagine, if you will, that we're about to embark on a journey to the bottom of the Atlantic, a voyage to witness one of history's most iconic shipwrecks, the Titanic. For decades, our understanding of this underwater tomb was piecemeal, based on fragmented glimpses and artistic interpretations. We conjured images in our minds, filling the gaps with speculation. But now, that has changed. Now, we possess something remarkable. A complete digital scan of the Titanic. A dedicated team of experts meticulously mapped the ocean floor, capturing every detail of the wreck itself. This is more than just an image. It's a 3D reconstruction, a breathtaking view, as if the ocean itself has been drained away, revealing the Titanic in its entirety. The story of rediscovering the Titanic begins in 1985, 73 years after its tragic sinking. Explorer Robert Ballard, while on a different mission entirely, searching for two lost submarines, stumbled upon the wreck. He didn't have the resources for a full exploration at the time, but his observations proved crucial. Ballard realized how ocean currents affected the dispersal of sinking debris. He noted that heavier objects plummeted directly to the seabed, leaving a trail of lighter debris carried by the currents. From this, Ballard hypothesized that the Titanic hadn't sunk in one piece, but had broken apart during its descent, leaving a scattered trail of wreckage. This was a radical departure from the prevailing belief that the ship remained intact until it reached the ocean floor. Even with the wreck located, exploration remained a daunting challenge. The Titanic is colossal, and the crushing depths of the ocean, shrouded in perpetual darkness, made comprehensive imaging nearly impossible. For years, we were limited to fleeting glimpses, piecing together the puzzle with educated guesses and captivating stories. Then, in the summer of 2022, everything changed. A team from Magellan, a company specializing in deep-sea mapping, partnered with Atlantic Productions, who were filming a documentary about the project. Their mission, to create a complete visual record of the Titanic. They deployed remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, sophisticated submersibles piloted by skilled explorers. These ROVs plunged into the abyss, spending over 200 hours meticulously documenting every inch of the wreck. It was a real-life treasure hunt, but instead of gold and jewels, they sought something far more valuable: knowledge. The result? Over 700,000 images of the Titanic, captured from every conceivable angle. Every detail, no matter how seemingly insignificant, was recorded. Even the muddy seabed surrounding the wreck was carefully mapped, filling in the gaps between the more dramatic discoveries. Now, we can finally behold a detailed 3D reconstruction of the Titanic. Over a century has passed since the disaster, yet the iconic bow remains recognizable, draped in rust formations resembling stalactites. Above, the boat deck features a gaping hole, offering a glimpse into the empty space where the grand staircase once stood, a poignant reminder of the ship's opulent past. In stark contrast, the stern is a chaotic jumble of twisted metal, a testament to the immense forces unleashed during the sinking. This section imploded and spiraled towards the seabed, ultimately settling some 2,600 feet away from the bow. Surrounding the main wreckage is a vast debris field, a scattered treasure trove of artifacts. Intricate metalwork, statues, and even unopened champagne bottles lie strewn across the ocean floor. Personal belongings, heartbreaking reminders of the lives lost, are scattered among the wreckage, including dozens of shoes resting silently on the seabed. Capturing these images was a monumental undertaking. While the ROVs, not humans, braved the extreme depths, the challenges were immense. We've barely explored our oceans. Over 80% remains unmapped and unseen. The conditions are brutal, and the pressure intensifies with every foot of descent. The ROVs had to withstand pressures equivalent to 12 Eiffel Towers stacked one atop another. Powerful currents added to the difficulty, turning the underwater environment into a treacherous maze. The ROVs had to navigate with extreme precision, avoiding any contact with the fragile wreck. Even the slightest bump could cause irreversible damage. The Titanic may appear frozen in time, seemingly waiting for us to explore it. But the reality is far different. It's slowly disappearing. The corrosive effects of salt water are taking their toll, relentlessly decaying the ship's structure. But that's not the only threat. The wreck has become a habitat for a unique type of bacteria: Halomonas titanici. Halomonas titanici, named after its infamous home. These bacteria thrive within rustical formations, which resemble icicles of rust. These rusticles, while visually striking, are actually accelerating the decomposition of the Titanic. Imagine a silent world, deep beneath the waves, where the skeletal remains of the Titanic rest. Here, in the crushing darkness, a slow and inexorable drama unfolds. Water drips from the rusted metal, instantly freezing into delicate ghostly formations. Underwater stalactites. But this isn't just about cold, inorganic processes. Microscopic life is at work, too. Consider the bacteria that thrive on iron. For these organisms, the Titanic's hull is a vast, all-you-can-eat buffet. They relentlessly consume the iron, molecule by molecule, weakening the ship's structure with each passing year. It's a slow, patient recycling process, a battle between metal and microbe that the microbes are ultimately winning. This is why the recent 3D model of the wreck is so vital. Time is running out. We don't know how much longer the Titanic will remain, even in this degraded state. This detailed scan offers a chance to understand the disaster with unprecedented clarity. For decades, popular culture has depicted the Titanic striking the iceberg on its starboard side. But is this accurate? The scans may reveal whether the ship actually ran aground on the iceberg, becoming impaled on the ice. Analyzing the stern and its impact with the seafloor could unlock crucial secrets about the sinking itself. Perhaps we'll finally determine if a raging coal fire played a decisive role in the tragedy. One theory suggests that a fire burned for 3 weeks before the voyage even began, weakening the hull and making it fatally vulnerable. The iceberg, or whatever it was, merely delivered the coup de grace. But what if it wasn't an iceberg at all? Some researchers propose that the Titanic struck a hidden mass of pack ice. Vast, flat sheets of ice drifting near the surface. Difficult to detect in the darkness. This pack ice, originating from the Arctic Ocean, could have been the true culprit. Captain L.M. Collins, a seasoned mariner, supports this theory. He argues that a collision with a standard iceberg would have caused a much faster sinking. The fact that the Titanic remained afloat for nearly 3 hours suggests a different kind of impact. Adding to the mystery, eyewitness accounts of the sinking vary significantly. Captain Collins believes that optical illusions may have played a role, with the conditions at sea distorting perceptions and making objects appear closer or further away than they actually were. What people saw that night might not have been what was truly there. Binoculars could have helped the crew spot the danger in time, but tragically, they were locked away, and the key was nowhere to be found. As the movie vividly portrays, the sinking was a protracted and agonizing process, lasting 2 hours and 40 minutes. Imagine the chaos, the fear, the desperate struggle for survival amidst the 2,200 souls on board. Thomas Andrews, the ship's chief designer, quickly grasped the grim reality. The Titanic was doomed. By midnight, the crew began the desperate task of preparing the lifeboats. There were only 20 boats, with a total capacity of just 1,178 people. Barely half of those on board. The order was clear: women and children first. Crewmen manned the oars, guiding the boats into the frigid waters. The scene grew increasingly desperate as the night wore on. Crew members frantically roused sleeping passengers, urging them into the lifeboats as quickly as possible. At 12:15 a.m., the first distress signals went out. The steamship Frankfurt received the message but was too far away, approximately 170 nautical miles. Other ships responded, but their distance made timely assistance impossible. At 12:20 a.m., the Cunard liner Carpathia picked up the Titanic's distress call and immediately changed course. They were 58 miles away, but it would still take over 3 hours to reach the sinking ship. 20 minutes later, the first lifeboat was lowered, carrying only 27 passengers despite a capacity of 65. Many of the initial lifeboats launched were woefully underfilled. Crew members feared that the davits, the mechanisms used to lower the boats, wouldn't be able to handle fully loaded lifeboats. And initially, many passengers were reluctant to leave the perceived safety of the Titanic, clinging to the belief that the unsinkable ship would somehow survive. Imagine the desperate scene unfolding. The situation was about to turn catastrophic within the next hour or two. The crew, realizing the gravity of their predicament, launched the first of 8 distress rockets into the night sky. A futile gesture. They were alone, isolated. No ship was near enough to render assistance. By 1:20 a.m., with the situation deteriorating rapidly, the order was given to lower the lifeboats. 10 lifeboats were deployed, each a tiny beacon of hope against the vast, indifferent ocean. Lifeboat number 8, however, was tragically underfilled, carrying only 28 souls. Among the passengers in lifeboat number 10 was a 9-week-old infant named Melvina Dean. Unbeknownst to anyone at that moment, Melvina would become the last living survivor of this tragedy, living until 2009 and reaching the remarkable age of 97. The relentless clock ticked onward. It was now 2 p.m. Only 3 collapsible lifeboats remained aboard the rapidly sinking vessel. The bow, already submerged, dragged the ship further into the icy depths. Those still on deck could now witness the terrifying sight of the stern propellers, exposed and helpless above the water. Crew members frantically worked to lower collapsible lifeboat D from the roof of the officers' quarters. More than 20 passengers clung to it, their faces etched with fear and desperation. As the bow plunged deeper, the unforgiving sea washed collapsible A from the deck. 20 more souls now struggled against the frigid water, their lifeboat partially swamped. Amidst the chaos, the crew attempted to release collapsible B. Disaster struck. The lifeboat fell, plunging into the ocean. Before they could right it, a powerful wave swept it away. Miraculously, 30 passengers managed to clamber onto the overturned hull, finding a precarious temporary refuge. At 2:17 a.m., with the end near, the ship's wireless operator made a final desperate act. One last distress call crackled out across the airwaves. A minute later, the ship's lights flickered and died, plunging the Titanic and all those remaining aboard into an abyss of darkness. The bow continued its relentless descent, while the stern rose ever higher, placing unimaginable stress on the ship's midsection. Then came the sounds. Groaning, screeching, tearing. Horrible noises that echoed across the water. The Titanic, that massive, legendary ship, the pride of a generation, the vessel on which so many had pinned their hopes and dreams, broke apart. It snapped in two between the third and fourth funnels, a monument to human ambition, now crumbling in the face of nature's fury. Reports later speculated that it took approximately 6 agonizing minutes for the bow section to reach the ocean floor. The stern, momentarily relieved of the bow's weight, settled back into the water before rising once more into a vertical position. It hung there, suspended between the world above and the darkness below, before finally succumbing to the depths. At 2:20 a.m., the stern, still containing pockets of air, was crushed by the immense water pressure as it sank. It came to rest roughly 2,000 feet away from the bow, a testament to the violent forces at play. The Titanic, billed as the fastest ship in the world, declared virtually unsinkable thanks to its compartmentalized design. Even with 4 compartments flooded, it was believed the ship would remain afloat, but its fate was sealed almost from the beginning. As the ship departed port, it came within mere feet of colliding with the steamer New York. A near miss, a moment of collective relief for the anxious passengers gathered on deck. The Titanic set sail on April 10th, embarking on its maiden voyage across the highly competitive Atlantic route. On that day, it was the largest movable object ever created by humankind. 882 feet long and 92 feet wide. While impressive for its time, it pales in comparison to modern behemoths. Today's largest cruise ship, Royal Caribbean's Symphony of the Seas, is roughly 5 times the size of the Titanic. Imagine that ship standing vertically. It would be nearly as tall as the Empire State Building, which stretches 1,250 feet without its antennas. But back then, the Titanic was an unparalleled marvel. The journey began with stops in France and Ireland. Once the final passengers boarded, the massive ship set out at full speed towards its ultimate destination, New York City. 4 days into its journey, disaster struck. The Titanic failed to avoid a colossal iceberg, the story we all know so well. Only approximately 700 people survived, the majority of them women and children. The night was bitterly cold, the water a deadly embrace. An hour and 20 minutes after the Titanic vanished beneath the waves, the survivors huddled in lifeboats, unsure if rescue would ever arrive. Then, a glimmer of hope. A light on the horizon. It was the Carpathia, steaming towards them through the darkness. The Carpathia's crew began rescuing the survivors from the lifeboats, pulling them aboard and hauling a handful of others from the frigid water. In the hours that followed, countless ships attempted to contact the Titanic, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded. Their messages went unanswered. Later, an official investigation revealed a shocking truth. The Leyland liner California had been less than 20 miles away when the Titanic was sinking, but its crew remained oblivious to the unfolding disaster, their radio operator off-duty and the distress signals unheard. The world was stunned. Countries on both sides of the Atlantic were shocked and horrified by the details of the Titanic disaster. The tragedy spurred immediate action, leading to significant changes in maritime operations and regulations designed to prevent such catastrophes from happening again. The first International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea was convened, resulting in the adoption of new rules for every ship. The disaster spurred immediate changes. To ensure safety on future voyages, regulations mandated lifeboat space for every single passenger. No more gambling with lives. Furthermore, lifeboat drills became a compulsory exercise, preparing passengers for the unthinkable. An international ice patrol was established, tasked with the vital mission of monitoring the treacherous icebergs lurking in the North Atlantic shipping lanes, a constant threat to maritime traffic. And ships were now required to maintain a 24-hour radio watch, a vigilant ear to the ether, ready to respond to any distress signal. The Titanic wasn't born in isolation. The sheer scale of this magnificent vessel, coupled with the advanced technology it incorporated, made it financially prohibitive as a standalone project. Thus, the Titanic was constructed alongside two sister ships, each with its own unique and ultimately tragic story. First came the RMS Olympic, launched in 1910. For a fleeting year, it reigned supreme as the largest liner in the world. Then, there was the Britannic, another sibling that sailed for a while before meeting a similar fate, succumbing to the depths of the ocean. But it was the Titanic that captured the world's imagination, becoming a legend, one of the most compelling narratives of modern history. Once a celebrated behemoth, the largest ship of its era, it now rests as two colossal fragments on the ocean floor, separated by approximately 2,000 feet, a testament to the devastating power of the collision and the relentless passage of time. The stern of the Titanic suffered catastrophic damage upon impact with the seabed. Yet the bow remains remarkably recognizable, with many of its interiors surprisingly well preserved, offering a ghostly glimpse into a bygone era. A particular type of bacteria thrives on the ship's rusticles. These rusticles are the brownish, stalactite-like formations of rust that develop deep underwater, a consequence of the oxidation of the wrought iron that constitutes the ship's hull. These bacteria are essentially consuming the iron of the Titanic piece by piece. Scientists estimate that they may finish their grim feast by 2030, a shockingly short time frame for the complete disintegration of the wreck. One might wonder, why not raise the wreck from the depths and preserve it for posterity? Sadly, any attempt to do so would likely result in its complete collapse. Having spent over a century submerged, the Titanic is now so riddled with rust and decay that even if salvaged, reconstructing certain sections would be an impossible task. A heartbreaking thought. Could any of the 700 souls who survived the sinking have heard the Titanic strike the ocean floor? Imagine witnessing the largest ship ever built vanish before your very eyes. Unfortunately, sound transmission from water to air is extremely limited. Our bodies are simply not designed to perceive sound effectively in an aquatic environment. And while the survivors were relatively close to the site of the sinking, the Titanic ultimately impacted the bottom at a staggering depth of 12,500 feet. Consider the numerous underwater landslides and earthquakes that occur constantly, generating far more noise than a single ship hitting the seabed. These vibrations and sounds would have dissipated rapidly across the vast expanse of the ocean. Furthermore, the immense downblast of water, which many believe occurred after the Titanic reached the bottom, would have further suppressed any potential acoustic vibrations. Finally, the ocean floor itself is not solid enough to produce a significant sound upon impact. While many survivors recounted hearing terrifying noises as the Titanic broke apart, none reported hearing anything after the ship disappeared beneath the waves. Survivors described a scene of utter chaos as passengers, primarily women and children, desperately attempted to board the lifeboats. There were not enough lifeboats to accommodate everyone, and some were launched without being filled to their maximum capacity. No one was adequately prepared to react to such a catastrophic event. The lifeboat drill, scheduled for the morning before the collision, had been inexplicably canceled. A colossal ocean liner, deemed unsinkable, embarks on a transatlantic voyage. It strikes an iceberg and sinks. We all know the tragic tale, but what's truly eerie is that this exact scenario forms the plot of The Wreck of the Titan, a novel published in 1898, a full 14 years before the Titanic met its watery grave, and even before its construction had begun. In the novel, the Titan, a chillingly accurate name, lacked sufficient life jackets, vests, and lifeboats for all passengers. It was also the largest ship of its time, almost identical in size to the Titanic. Both the fictional Titan and the real Titanic sank in the month of April. A strange and unsettling coincidence. Dorothy Gibson, an American silent film actress, was among the passengers aboard the Titanic. She survived the disaster, and shortly after arriving in New York, she began filming Saved from the Titanic. The film was released a mere month after the sinking. Dorothy even wore the same shoes and clothes she had worn on the ship during the actual catastrophe. The movie was a success, but tragically, it was destroyed in a fire, existing now only in memories and historical accounts. Much like the fictional Jack Dawson, the Titanic was not alone in the unforgiving grip of the ocean. Imagine a frigid, unforgiving ocean. Towering icebergs drift silently, their immense bulk hidden beneath the waterline. It is here, amidst these frozen giants, that tragedy unfolds. The mighty Titanic, pride of the White Star Line, meets its doom. The SS Californian, another vessel, lay relatively nearby on that fateful night. Unbeknownst to those aboard the sinking Titanic, the Californian's radio operator had signed off for the evening. Yet, through the darkness, the Californian's crew witnessed strange lights illuminating the heavens. They roused their captain, but he dismissed the spectacle, perhaps mistaking the urgent flares for mere fireworks. Little did they know, these were desperate cries for help, signals launched by the doomed passengers and crew of the Titanic. By the time the Californian received the belated SOS, it was tragically too late. Some believe a celestial event may have conspired against the Titanic. A full moon, it is theorized, could have generated exceptionally powerful tides. These surging currents may have pushed a flotilla of icebergs southward, directly into the path of the unsuspecting ocean liner. Imagine, if you will, the wreck of the Titanic, resting in its cold, watery grave for over a century. Discovered more than 70 years after its sinking, the ship holds secrets within its corroded hull. Could any of the food that went down with the ship have survived the ravages of time and the deep-sea environment? While much would have decayed, some foods, like cheese, possess a remarkable resilience. The very microbes that transform milk into cheese also create conditions that inhibit spoilage. Perhaps within the wreck, a tantalizing, if unappetizing, relic of that ill-fated voyage remains. But it is not only food that has endured. A fragile handwritten letter, penned by a mother and daughter to the girl's grandmother, speaks of the excitement of their journey. This poignant message, a testament to human connection, has survived over a century and was later sold at auction. A pair of worn white cotton gloves, remnants of a life interrupted, was also recovered from the wreckage. And the haunting echo of music lingers, for the musicians of the Titanic played on until the very end. Sheet music and a solitary violin were discovered amidst the debris. The bell, frantically rung to warn of the impending iceberg, a desperate attempt to avert disaster, was also brought to the surface. A pocket watch, its hands frozen at 1:45 a.m., marks the precise moment the ship plunged into the depths. Could one man have altered the course of history? David Blair, originally slated to serve as the Titanic's second officer, was removed from the assignment at the last minute, a twist of fate that saved his life. But this reprieve was tinged with the agonizing question: could he have prevented the catastrophe? In that era, before the advent of sophisticated radar and navigation systems, ships relied on vigilance and shared warnings. Binoculars were a crucial tool, yet the crew of the Titanic were denied access to them. The binoculars were locked away, and David Blair, in his hasty departure, had inadvertently taken the key with him. Had those binoculars been available, could the iceberg have been spotted sooner, allowing for a change of course that might have spared the ship? Scientists speculate that the colossal iceberg responsible for the Titanic's demise originated as snow in southwest Greenland. Using computer models, they have reconstructed the iceberg's likely trajectory, factoring in ocean currents and historical weather data. This frozen behemoth may have been an astonishing 1,700 feet long and weighed approximately 75 tons when it began its journey. By the time it collided with the Titanic, it had been reduced to a still massive 1.5 tons. Then, there's the story of Violet Constance Jessup, dubbed Miss Unsinkable. At just 24 years old, she worked as a stewardess aboard the Titanic. On that infamous night, she was jolted awake by the impact. Rising quickly, she dressed and rushed to the deck, where she assisted passengers into lifeboats. But her story doesn't end there. 4 years later, she found herself aboard the Britannic, the Titanic's sister ship. Once again, disaster struck, and the ship began to sink. Violet Jessup not only survived yet another maritime catastrophe, but once again bravely helped others escape before the vessel vanished beneath the waves. At 11:39 p.m., the lookout's cry pierced the night. "Iceberg! Right ahead!" Frantic maneuvers to reduce speed and alter course proved futile. The rest, as they say, is history. The sinking of the Titanic has become synonymous with unimaginable disaster. But was it truly a singular, unrepeatable event? The Titanic disaster occurred in 1912, a time before GPS and weather satellites. Ships relied on each other to relay information about icebergs, a system far from foolproof. The magnitude of the tragedy spurred the creation of an international organization dedicated to preventing similar accidents. And so, a year later, the International Ice Patrol was born. In the vast expanse of the North Atlantic, an organization known as the International Ice Patrol, or IIP, stands guard. Since its inception, the IIP has dedicated itself to providing vessels with crucial early warnings about the ever-present threat of icebergs. Over the years, their methods have evolved, incorporating everything from traditional ship reports and aerial patrols to sophisticated satellite imagery. More recently, they've begun deploying oceanographic buoys, floating sentinels that transmit real-time data about ocean conditions from the surface down to 164 feet. This information allows them to predict the potential drift of these icy behemoths. Thankfully, the IIP's vigilance has been remarkably effective in minimizing collisions between ships and icebergs. However, complacency would be a dangerous mistake. Even the most advanced detection technologies cannot guarantee the avoidance of every potential disaster. Between 1980 and 2005, a sobering 57 incidents involving vessels and icebergs were recorded. And the unsettling truth is that modern ships, despite their advanced technology, are statistically more likely to encounter an iceberg than the Titanic was on that fateful night. Consider this. Studies reveal that approximately 1,038 icebergs drifted across the very same area where the Titanic met its tragic end back in 1912. While this might seem like an alarming number, scientists point out that it's not entirely unprecedented. In fact, there have been at least 14 years since then with even greater iceberg activity. The increasing number of icebergs is a direct consequence of the accelerated melting of Greenland's glaciers. And with more and more ships venturing into polar waters, the probability of encounters inevitably rises. But the greatest danger for ship captains lies not in the massive, easily detectable icebergs, but in the insidious threat of growlers and bergy-bits. These are the invisible enemies of the sea. Growlers are essentially small icebergs, often no larger than a typical doorway. Bergy-bits, while somewhat larger, are still relatively small, often around the size of a school bus. These seemingly innocuous ice formations pose a significant threat because they can be virtually undetectable by radar and satellite systems. Imagine a modern cruise ship, a floating palace as immense as the Titanic, suddenly colliding with one of these smaller icebergs. Let's take, for example, the Norwegian Sun. This luxurious vessel, much like the Titanic, boasts a capacity of over 2,400 passengers and a crew of more than 900. In July 2022, the Norwegian Sun was navigating towards the majestic Hubbard Glacier in Alaska when it became enveloped in a dense fog. Without warning, passengers were jolted by a significant impact, sending a wave of fear through the ship. As the fog momentarily lifted, the horrifying truth became clear. The Norwegian Sun had collided with a growler. However, the outcome was dramatically different from that of the Titanic. Miraculously, there were no injuries, and both passengers and crew were safely evacuated to the Alaskan dock. Expert divers conducted a thorough inspection of the ship's hull and discovered that it had sustained some damage from the impact, leading to the cancellation of the remainder of the voyage. But before you cancel your next transatlantic cruise, remember that incidents like the one involving the Norwegian Sun remain relatively rare. While encounters with ice are not uncommon, it is unusual for them to result in significant damage. Modern cruise ships are designed and constructed to withstand impacts that would have been catastrophic for vessels like the Titanic. The steel used in the construction of the Titanic played a crucial role in its demise. The unsinkable ship, as it was proclaimed, proved to be anything but impact-resistant. The Titanic's hull was constructed from approximately 2,000 steel plates, believed to have been produced using an open-hearth furnace. This process resulted in steel with a high concentration of impurities like phosphorus, oxygen, and sulfur. Elevated levels of these elements made the steel brittle, particularly at low temperatures, causing it to fracture upon impact. While the steel used in the Titanic was considered to be of the highest quality available at the time, it would fall far short of modern safety standards, being approximately 10 times less impact-resistant than the materials used in today's vessels. But the most significant difference between the Titanic and a modern ship lies in the method of hull construction. The Titanic's hull and upper deck were held together by over 3 million rivets. When the ship struck the iceberg, the force of the impact caused these rivets to shear, initiating a catastrophic chain reaction that led to the collapse of entire sections of the hull. This resulted in uncontrollable flooding. In contrast, modern ships employ a technique called submerged arc welding. This process fuses the edges of metal plates together, creating a continuous and incredibly strong bond. This method offers significantly improved safety because if one section of the hull is damaged, the tear is far less likely to propagate, containing the damage to a localized area. So, while smaller icebergs are becoming increasingly prevalent and ships have been adapted to better withstand collisions, there remains one more terrifying scenario to contemplate. What if a colossal cruise ship were to strike an iceberg the size of a 5-story building? Let's conjure an image. The largest cruise ship ever conceived, a floating metropolis we'll christen Bright Seaside. This behemoth dwarfs even the grandest vessels, exceeding the Statue of Liberty in size fourfold and surpassing the Titanic by a staggering 318 feet. Imagine the sheer scale, accommodating nearly 3 times the passengers and crew of its ill-fated predecessor. And like the Titanic, Bright Seaside possesses impressive speed, capable of cruising at approximately 23 knots. Now, envision this. Bright Seaside, a city at sea, is steaming ahead at full throttle through frigid waters. It's the dead of night, and unbeknownst to the captain, the ship's advanced iceberg detection systems have been offline for 3 days, rendered useless. A dense fog blankets the ocean, and the lookout, hampered by the conditions, fails to spot a looming iceberg, a colossal mass of ice rising 45 feet above the waves. If this scenario were to unfold, a direct collision with the iceberg could spell disaster, potentially leading to the ship's sinking. But such a confluence of unfortunate events is highly improbable, isn't it? Experts confidently assert that icebergs pose a minimal threat to modern cruise ships. It's crucial to remember the advancements in maritime safety since the Titanic era. A contemporary vessel of this size is designed to withstand significant damage and can remain afloat for days, providing ample time for a safe evacuation. Crew training has also evolved, with rigorous protocols in place to manage emergencies. Passengers, too, undergo mandatory safety drills before setting sail. We know it can be a drag when all you want is to sip lemonade by the pool. These very safety measures are what prevented the MS Explorer from becoming a modern-day Titanic. In 2007, this Antarctic cruise ship struck an iceberg, but thanks to the crew's preparedness and the ship's design, all 154 souls on board successfully boarded lifeboats. Imagine the terror as they awaited rescue for 4 long hours. The crew's exemplary conduct undoubtedly averted a tragedy. However, a subsequent investigation revealed that the accident occurred because the captain, exhibiting a lack of experience, recklessly navigated the ship at excessive speed into an icy expanse in the Antarctic waters. This incident highlights a crucial point. Regardless of a ship's technological sophistication or the quality of its construction materials, a careless captain and an inadequately trained crew can transform a minor incident into a catastrophic event reminiscent of the Titanic. But don't let this dwell on your mind. Trust in the expertise of maritime professionals and consider the odds. In the past 3 decades, the MS Explorer remains the sole cruise ship to have succumbed to an iceberg, and remarkably, all passengers survived. So, relax and enjoy your cruise. Remember those heart-wrenching scenes from the Titanic, whether from the pages of a book or the silver screen? The ship is sinking, and there's nothing anyone can do. But according to a historian who wrote a book detailing the events from that unlucky ship, that story isn't entirely accurate. If his claims hold true, every life aboard the Titanic could have been spared. He argues that the SS Californian and the SS Mount Temple were within visual range of the sinking Titanic, yet they failed to intervene, paralyzed by fear or incompetence. In that era, the notion of the Titanic sinking was unfathomable. It was a floating palace, boasting luxurious lounges, Turkish baths, and even a squash court. But as it sped across the Atlantic, intent on shattering the transatlantic crossing record, it collided with an iceberg, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to tragedy. Numerous ships, upon receiving the distress signals, altered course to assist the stricken vessel. However, the two nearest ships hesitated. The SS Mount Temple, in particular, was remarkably close, a mere 50 miles away. It could have reached the Titanic in a couple of hours, potentially rescuing every passenger. However, its captain deemed such a journey too perilous, citing the presence of icebergs. While we cannot rewrite history, we can indulge in a thought experiment. Imagine if superheroes had been present during the Titanic disaster. What difference could they have made? First and foremost, a time traveler would have been invaluable. They could have journeyed back in time to warn the crew of the impending iceberg, allowing them to alter course and avert disaster. Or even better, they could have traveled further back in time to persuade the ship's captain to abandon the voyage altogether. Imagine, if you will, a world dominated not by steel ships, but by colossal reptiles. Let's journey back millions of years to a time when survival hinged on raw power and primal instincts. Now, picture a similar disaster, but instead of the icy Atlantic, it's a prehistoric swamp teeming with predators. What if, instead of the ill-fated Titanic, we had a lumbering Shantungosaurus, Shantungosaurus giganteus, one of the largest dinosaurs to ever walk the earth, facing an equally massive threat? First, imagine the herbivore's limited senses. Perhaps its eyesight wasn't the best, or the dense foliage obscured approaching dangers. If only this giant herbivore had access to heightened senses, a keener awareness of its surroundings, it might have detected the lurking danger sooner, perhaps mitigating the damage or avoiding the deadly encounter altogether. And what about defense? The Shantungosaurus, impressive as it was, primarily relied on its size. But what if its herd was separated, leaving only a few to fend for themselves? Though there were likely hundreds of dinosaurs in the herd, only a small group were close enough to protect each other. What if a flying Quetzalcoatlus northropi, a pterosaur with a wingspan rivaling a small airplane, had been soaring overhead? This aerial guardian could have surveyed the area, especially during the dim twilight hours when predators are most active. More so, the flying reptile might have helped by alerting the herd to danger much faster, warning of the lurking threat, and ensuring the Shantungosaurus were ready to defend themselves. If one of these behemoths had the ability to take flight, maybe they could have airlifted the smaller, weaker members of the herd to safety, away from the danger zone. Now imagine the power of concentrated energy. A creature with a bioelectrical discharge, a natural defense mechanism capable of stunning or repelling attackers. This force could have pulverized approaching predators in no time, instead of shivering in fear during the twilight hours of the Cretaceous period. The herd could have enjoyed a peaceful grazing session the next morning, courtesy of some harmless, stunned predators still recovering from the shock. Okay, maybe this bioelectrical discharge wouldn't have been powerful enough to completely incapacitate a Tyrannosaurus rex, allowing the Shantungosaurus to pass safely. Well, it could have at least created a diversion, buying the herd precious time to escape. Imagine a dinosaur with superhuman strength. Yeah, that might have surely helped too. They could have positioned themselves between the herd and the approaching predator, preventing a surprise attack. If, say, they just happened to be resting when the Tyrannosaurus rex struck, no biggie. They would have simply shielded the smaller dinosaurs, protecting them until the rest of the herd could muster a defense. If the Shantungosaurus had developed underwater breathing abilities, they'd have at least been able to escape the immediate danger. I mean, technically, there's nothing much you could have done to fight off the predator. Maybe you could have saved a bunch of other dinosaurs, but only if you were strong enough to keep them afloat while you swam comfortably underwater. If a dinosaur on board had been able to control the elements, that would have been amazing. Not only would it have saved a lot, if not all of the dinosaurs, it would have been fascinating to watch. Such a dinosaur would have been able to create a wall of fire to keep the predator away from the Shantungosaurus's injuries after the attack. If they were agile enough and had seen the predator before it struck the herd. They could have transformed the massive predator into a harmless puddle of water with just the snap of a finger. If we look at the records from that era, everything happened very fast with the dinosaurs. Wouldn't it have been nice to have someone on board who could slow down time? For the sake of the story, let's also imagine this dinosaur had a finely tuned intuition. They could have sensed something was wrong by the way the air smelled, or by the reaction of the herd when the predator was first spotted. With a simple gesture of their hands, they would have slowed down time almost to the point of stillness. They could have checked the records from the ship, its unusually fast speed, and could have alerted the captain to decide in time. The Shantungosaurus could have been stopped, or it could have been diverted away from the iceberg. A dinosaur with night vision would have been useful too. At least the dinosaur would have spotted the predator sooner than everyone else. Given that the hero could have seen a lot better in low light conditions, that hero would have probably better managed the rescue efforts that disastrous night. Invisibility. Would this superpower have saved the Shantungosaurus from sinking to the bottom of the Atlantic? I could think of a possible scenario or two. Anyone with the power to become invisible whenever they want to would have probably gone snooping around the ship. I mean, you have to remember, the Shantungosaurus had some of the most important members of society on board. It wasn't just any regular boat. It was probably buzzing with the latest gossip. In between all that mundane information, this superhero could have overheard the captain saying they were going faster than they should have, or that there weren't enough lifeboats to save everyone in case there was a major problem. Who knows what this curious superhero might have done with all this information? Imagine, if you will, the final moments of the Titanic's stern section. Trapped within its metal shell were pockets of air, remnants of a life that was quickly fading. As the stern spiraled down into the crushing depths, the relentless water pressure began its work. One by one, those air pockets succumbed, imploding with violent force. The very structure of the ship groaned and buckled, scattering debris across the ocean floor, fragments of metal, shattered furniture, once prized statues, and the poignant belongings of the passengers who had entrusted their lives to this floating palace. Experts believe the sheer, overwhelming pressure at those depths caused a catastrophic collapse, explaining why so little of the stern remains intact today. We rarely speak of it, this fractured tail end of the Titanic. It's a part of the story too broken, too painful to confront directly. The truly lost side of the ship. And tragically, the iconic bow is destined for the same fate. It won't stand defiant against the ocean's assault forever. The recognizable shape of the wreck is changing year after year, and not for the better. The front section of the Titanic is relentlessly deteriorating, and a day will come when it is entirely gone, swallowed by the abyss. Down on the seabed, the Titanic is subjected to immense pressure, nearly 390 times greater than at the surface. The good news, if there can be any in this slow-motion tragedy, is that there are no significant air pockets left within the ship. This means no more catastrophic implosions will occur. However, the relentless weight of the ship itself is now contributing to its destruction. Those 52,000 tons of steel are slowly settling into the ocean floor, twisting and pulling at the hull with inexorable force. Submersible missions have already revealed large cracks snaking through the steel plates, and the decks themselves are beginning to cave in, surrendering to the relentless pressure. But there's another, less obvious enemy at work. The wreck, with its eerie, haunting beauty, owes much of its character to a thick layer of bacteria and microbes that coat its surface. These organisms, however, are not merely passive observers. They are slowly consuming the Titanic. The majority of the corrosion occurring down there is caused by these microscopic organisms, gradually weakening the entire structure. Steel plates, beams, and supports are becoming thinner with each passing year, devoured by this unseen enemy. Scientists estimate that the ship is losing between 0.13 and 0.2 tons of iron every single day. Even at that seemingly slow rate, the wreck will not vanish overnight. Experts believe it could take up to 420 years for the liner to disappear completely. Until then, we will continue to witness this sad but natural process unfold, a testament to the power of the ocean and the relentless march of time. Parts of the ship have been falling apart bit by bit since the night the Titanic sank. Much has changed since we began capturing underwater images of the wreck. Railing sections have collapsed, and the ceiling in the captain's bathroom has given way. This is why so many expeditions are now focused on capturing footage and detailed scans of the Titanic shipwreck, preserving its memory before the ocean claims it entirely. It's our way of keeping the story alive, even as time and nature continue their silent work. Perhaps those hungry bacteria could take a break from their endless buffet, allowing the Titanic to rest in peace for many more years to come. It seems like we all shed a tear watching the heartbreaking goodbye of Jack and Rose in the movie Titanic. Oops, spoiler alert, sorry. But the real-life stories from the sinking of the famous ship were no less touching. Consider the story of Joseph Laroche. Born in 1886 in Haiti to a wealthy family, Joseph grew up without a father, but his mother was a self-made woman and a respected merchant. His uncle was even the head of state. Joseph was fluent in French, Creole, and English. At the age of 15, Joseph realized he wanted to become an engineer. There were no engineering schools in Haiti, so he made the bold decision to move to France to pursue his education. The journey took him a staggering 83 days. While still a student, Joseph met Juliette in a suburb of Paris through a mutual acquaintance. They soon became friends, and their bond deepened into something more profound. The couple decided to marry. But there was one significant obstacle. Despite his intelligence and education, Joseph struggled to find well-paid, qualified employment due to racial discrimination. He knew he could achieve more, and he needed to provide for his growing family as their third child was on the way. His uncle back in Haiti promised to help Joseph secure a position as a mathematics professor. Joseph's mother was overjoyed at the prospect of her son and his family returning to Haiti. As a reunion gift, she purchased them first-class tickets on the French liner La France. However, that liner had peculiar rules that separated parents from their children during meals. The Laroche family didn't want to leave their young ones feeling distressed during the ocean voyage. Therefore, they made the fateful decision to exchange their first-class tickets on La France for second-class tickets on the RMS Titanic's maiden voyage. The Titanic was the talk of the world, and it didn't separate families. It seemed like a perfect solution. They planned to transfer to another ship in New York, which would take them directly to their final destination in Haiti. The family boarded the Titanic on Imagine, if you will, a world where the ill-fated Titanic wasn't doomed to its icy grave. Suppose, just suppose, a powerful sorcerer had been among the passengers that fateful night. Surely, amidst the arcane tomes of forgotten ages, there must exist a spell, a potent incantation capable of averting such a catastrophe. Perhaps a spell to mend the fractured steel, to reknit the hull torn asunder by the unforgiving iceberg. Or, picture this: a mystical levitation, hoisting the colossal vessel skyward, carrying it to safety on ethereal winds. A truly grand spectacle, but why stop there? Envision a transformative enchantment, morphing the Titanic into a magnificent submarine, encased in a shimmering, impenetrable barrier, allowing it to glide effortlessly beneath the waves. What a breathtaking experience for those on board, a voyage unlike any other in human history. And what about the gift of tongues? The power to converse with the creatures of the deep. Imagine someone aboard possessing this extraordinary ability. Even if disaster struck, even if the Titanic succumbed to the icy grip of the Atlantic, all hope would not be lost. Our gifted individual could summon a pod of dolphins, those intelligent and benevolent cetaceans, and implore them to ferry the passengers to safety. A truly remarkable rescue, orchestrated by the magic of the prehistoric world. A testament to the power of nature, guided by the hand of a sorcerer. Imagine stepping back in time to April 10th, 1912, in Sherborne, England. We find ourselves amidst the excitement and anticipation surrounding the departure of the ill-fated Titanic. For the Laroche family, this voyage promised adventure and a new beginning. They had a full 3 days ahead of them to relish the opulent accommodations afforded to second-class passengers. Spacious staterooms, an elegant dining salon, a well-stocked library, and 3 expansive outdoor promenade decks. Juliette Laroche, filled with optimism, penned a letter to her father from Queenstown, Ireland, the Titanic's final port of call. In her letter, she conveyed the family's delight with their accommodations. Their cabin featured 2 comfortable bunks and a convertible couch bed, perfectly suited for their youngest children. The LaRoche family quickly befriended fellow passengers, forging bonds with those who had journeyed with them from Paris. They believed themselves to be the only French citizens on board and made sure to share meals together. Juliet noted in her letter that they spent much time together on the ship's deck, enjoying the sea breeze and each other's company. She also commented on the friendliness of the other passengers, though some accounts suggest the family faced subtle prejudice, whispers, and unkind stares. However, the family's exciting journey was destined for a tragic and abrupt end on the night of April 14th. Despite numerous warnings received by the Titanic's wireless operators about the presence of drifting icebergs in the vicinity, the colossal liner continued its course at full speed, a decision that would prove fatal. At approximately 11:40 p.m., disaster struck as the Titanic's hull collided with a massive iceberg roughly 370 miles off the coast of Newfoundland. The seemingly unsinkable vessel was tragically under-equipped with lifeboats, providing space for only half of its 2,200 passengers. Compounding the crisis, the nearest rescue ship, the Carpathia, was too distant to offer immediate assistance. A steward urgently roused the LaRoche family from their slumber and guided them toward the lifeboats. Juliet, who spoke little English, found the unfolding chaos even more terrifying and disorienting. Shortly after midnight, the crew issued the heartbreaking order to prioritize women and children when boarding the lifeboats. Juliet later recounted the eruption of a terrible panic as passengers desperately fought for a place on the departing boats. In the chaotic scramble, she felt her older daughter, Simone, was snatched from her grasp and thrust into the dark abyss. An instant later, she and her other daughter followed Simone into the same emptiness. In the end, Juliet, pregnant with her 3rd child, and her 2 daughters secured spots in Lifeboat 14. But this bittersweet victory came at a devastating price. They had to bid farewell to Joseph, the patriarch of the family, as the lifeboat was lowered into the icy sea. With a loving gesture, Joseph wrapped his coat around Juliet, knowing she would need it against the frigid air. He promised to board another lifeboat and reunite with her and their daughters in New York. Sadly, the 25-year-old Joseph LaRoche could not keep his promise. Within a few agonizing hours, the Titanic succumbed to the sea, plunging into the depths and claiming the lives of nearly 2,500 souls. Joseph was among the lost. Juliet and her daughters were among the roughly 700 survivors rescued by the Cunard liner Carpathia several hours later. Upon reaching New York, they desperately scanned the crowds, clinging to the hope of seeing Joseph once more. But as the reality of his absence sank in, they faced the daunting task of charting a new course for their lives. Bereft of Joseph, their knowledge of English, and the money that had vanished with the ship, Juliet faced an impossible situation. She managed to eke out a meager existence in America for only 3 weeks before succumbing to the inevitable. She had no choice but to return to France. Tragedy continued to haunt her family. Joseph's uncle, who had previously offered support, was murdered just 4 months after the Titanic disaster. In December 1912, Juliet gave birth to a son, whom she named Joseph in honor of his father. For the remainder of her days, Juliet remained haunted by the loss of her beloved husband. She rarely spoke of the events of the Titanic and discouraged her children from mentioning it. It wasn't until 1995 that the heartbreaking story of the LaRoche family came to light. A member of the Titanic Historical Society interviewed Louise, the last surviving LaRoche child and the last French survivor of the sinking. The world finally learned of their profound loss and resilience. While their story inspired plays and articles, it never achieved the same recognition as other passengers' tales. Consider, for example, the iconic image of the elderly couple embracing in their bed as the Titanic sank. This poignant scene was inspired by Isidor and Ida Strauss. Both were German immigrants who arrived in the United States as children. They met in New York, fell in love, and married 5 years later. Isidor, along with his brother, founded a successful china and porcelain business that eventually evolved into the glassware department at Macy's, transforming them into multimillionaires. Isidor and Ida were highly respected in New York, not only for their wealth and philanthropic endeavors, but also for the deep and abiding love they shared. In 1912, the Strausses decided to escape the harsh New York winters and embarked on a journey to Europe. They had been married for 40 years by that point. In early April, they prepared to sail back home to New York. While they typically traveled on grand German liners, they couldn't resist the allure and the buzz surrounding the new luxury liner, the RMS Titanic. This is how they found themselves in one of the first-class private suites at the very top of the ship, unknowingly sailing toward their destiny. Imagine yourself in a bygone era, the early 20th century. Picture a lavish dining hall aboard the Titanic, where Isidore and Ida Strauss, a wealthy couple, are enjoying an evening meal. A live orchestra fills the air with music, their melodies echoing through the hall, adorned with fancy furniture and expensive wooden paneling. It's April 14th, and the night seems like any other, until a slight tremor runs through the colossal ship. The Strausses, sensing something amiss, calmly leave their private suite, awaiting instructions from the crew. Passengers are told not to worry, to keep their passes, reassuring them they will soon be back on board. But beneath the surface, disaster looms. The ship is sinking. Mr. and Mrs. Strauss find themselves standing near lifeboat number 8. Isidore, a distinguished 67-year-old man, is offered a seat alongside his wife due to his age. But in a moment of profound selflessness, he refuses. He declares that he is not too old to make a sacrifice for a woman, insisting that women and children be given priority. Ellen Bird, Ida's maid, hesitates at the prospect of boarding the lifeboat without her employers. But Ida urges her to go, understanding the gravity of the situation. Ida makes a heartbreaking decision, choosing not to abandon her husband in his final moments on the sinking ship. She removes her beautiful mink coat, handing it to her shivering maid, uttering the poignant words that she would no longer need it. Isidore is unable to convince Ida to save herself, so together they face their fate. Some of the surviving first-class passengers later recount seeing the couple standing peacefully on the deck, holding hands, their love unwavering in the face of impending doom. Now, let's turn our attention to a detail often overlooked in the popular imagination. In the Titanic movie, you won't see any smoke billowing from the fourth funnel of the legendary ocean liner. This isn't a cinematic oversight. Back in 1911, a year before the ship's ill-fated maiden voyage, large vessels primarily relied on 4 chimneys to vent heat and fumes from their massive boilers. The Titanic, however, was a marvel of engineering, requiring only 3 functional chimneys. So, the fourth was added purely for aesthetic balance and to create a more impressive visual spectacle. The White Star Line, the company that built the Titanic, believed that the public would be underwhelmed by the sight of only 3 funnels on the grandest ship ever built. The Titanic's sister ships, the Olympic and the Britannic, also featured a non-functional funnel for the same reason. However, this dummy chimney wasn't entirely useless. It served as a ventilation shaft, extracting fumes from the machine spaces on the lower decks and from one of the first-class general rooms. This single large ventilation funnel, rather than several smaller ones, helped to declutter the upper decks, providing more open space for passengers to enjoy their leisurely strolls. When the Titanic plunged into the icy depths of the Atlantic, each of the funnels, weighing a staggering 60 tons, met the same watery grave. They were designed to be exceptionally tall, to prevent passengers from being covered in soot. Their height and weight ensured they remained upright as the ship sank. The forward funnel, followed by the others, detached only when the ship made its final dramatic plunge. These chimneys, being lighter than the massive bow, scattered among the debris field on the ocean floor. The relatively light materials they were constructed from flattened upon impact with the seabed. Over time, iron-eating bacteria, thriving in the deep-sea environment, consumed what remained. While the bow of the Titanic remained relatively intact after striking the ocean floor, the stern suffered a catastrophic implosion. The moment the famous ocean liner struck the iceberg, a chain of events was set in motion. It would take an agonizing 2 hours and 40 minutes for the ship to completely submerge. The collision caused water to flood 6 of the 16 watertight compartments. As the icy water surged into the starboard side, the ship began to tilt downward at the bow and slightly to the right. By midnight, the damaged compartments were overflowing, spilling water into adjacent compartments. Chaos ensued as the compartments were only watertight, horizontally. Water began to flood through the anchor chain holes, and by 2 a.m., the bow was rapidly sinking, causing the stern's propellers to rise out of the water. The ship continued to flood relentlessly until the bow dipped beneath the surface, causing the stern to rise to an almost vertical 45-degree angle. The immense weight of the massive propellers placed unbearable stress on the ship's midsection. The steel, strained beyond its limits, ultimately failed. Survivors recounted hearing a series of loud noises, like breaking china or falling gear. This was the sound of the Titanic's upper structure collapsing under the immense pressure. By 2:20 a.m., the bow and stern were connected only by the inner bottom structure. Moments later, the bow, weighing approximately 16,000 tons, broke free from the stern. The stern rose sharply to a near-vertical position and began its slow descent. By 2:20 a.m., the stern vanished beneath the waves. The bow, plummeting at approximately 13 miles per hour, struck the ocean floor nearly half an hour before the stern. The two sections of the Titanic now rest 2,000 feet apart, oriented in different directions. The bow remains largely intact, buried in mud. The stern, however, was reduced to a tangled wreck due to the implosions it suffered during its descent. The air trapped within the structure couldn't withstand the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. Signal rockets played a significant role in the Titanic's tragedy. Imagine, if you will, a dark night on the open ocean. The year is 1912. A ship in distress is supposed to signal for help with bright red flares, a universal sign of emergency. But on this fateful night, someone made a catastrophic decision. Instead of the customary red, white flares were deployed from the Titanic. As the colossal ship, the unsinkable Titanic, collided with that unforgiving iceberg, the crew, following orders, launched those misleading white rockets into the sky. The SS Californian, another vessel, was navigating nearby waters. Its captain was acutely aware that the Titanic was steaming through a perilous zone, riddled with icebergs. The crew of the Californian didn't visually spot the stricken Titanic itself, but they did observe the strange white flares ascending into the night. Tragically, radio communication between the two ships proved useless. The Californian's radio operator had already signed off for the night, switching off his equipment. Yet, the captain of the Californian felt a nagging sense that something was terribly wrong. He attempted to signal the Titanic using a Morse code lamp, desperately flashing a message. But his efforts were in vain. The Titanic, in its death throes, had already slipped beneath the icy waves. Adding another layer to this maritime tragedy, there was yet another ship present. The Samson. This vessel, shrouded in darkness, was laden with an illicit cargo. Illegally hunted frozen seal meat, poached from Canadian waters. To evade detection, the Samson was sailing without lights. When the crew of the Samson observed the Titanic's white rockets, they mistook them for a Coast Guard patrol and hastily fled the scene. Crucially, the Samson lacked a radio, leaving its crew completely unaware of the unfolding disaster. The crew only learned of the Titanic's fate weeks later, upon reaching the shores of Iceland. Over the years, countless theories have emerged to explain the sinking of the Titanic. One particularly compelling theory centers on a hidden fire. An Irish journalist, driven by decades of relentless investigation, unearthed a potential game-changer. He discovered a collection of photographs hidden from public view for a century after the tragedy. These images, taken at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Northern Ireland, just days before the Titanic's maiden voyage, reveal a startling anomaly: a massive 30-foot black mark marring the ship's hull. Through meticulous research of the photos and eyewitness accounts from that era, the journalist Maloney concluded that a fire had spontaneously erupted within one of the Titanic's immense coal bunkers. The blaze raged for a full 3 weeks, its intense heat compromising the integrity of the metal and critically weakening a vital section of the ship's hull. In that era, most ships, including the Titanic, possessed only a single hull. This single layer of steel was the ship's only defense against the unforgiving ocean. The fire's damage, according to this theory, explains why the iceberg was able to penetrate the hull with such ease. Had it not been for the fire, the Titanic might have withstood the impact. The company that owned the Titanic was aware of the fire, but they chose to suppress the information. They feared negative publicity, especially given the intense competition in the transatlantic passenger trade. The Titanic was fully booked, so they continued to load coal and pressed ahead with the voyage. The moon, too, may have played an indirect role in the disaster. Our celestial neighbor exerts a powerful influence on Earth's tides. The closer the moon is to our planet, the stronger its gravitational pull, and the higher the tides become. In 1912, the moon's proximity was exceptional, triggering the calving of numerous glaciers in Greenland. Enormous icebergs, dislodged from these glaciers, began drifting southward. This supermoon event occurred a mere 6 minutes after a spring tide. During new and full moons, the alignment of the sun, earth, and moon amplifies their combined gravitational forces. Furthermore, the day prior, Earth had reached its closest point to the sun for the year, further intensifying gravitational effects. This confluence of events created ideal conditions for one of the most powerful tides in recorded history. These extreme tides likely facilitated the movement of icebergs that had broken off from Greenland's glaciers. However, critics of this theory argue that the difference in tidal force was not significant enough to be the primary cause of the sinking. The iceberg, in its encounter with the Titanic, tore along the side of the ship, creating a series of breaches in the hull. It wasn't a single continuous gash, but rather damage inflicted across multiple compartments. Some experts believe that the Titanic might have survived the collision had it struck the iceberg head-on. The Titanic was equipped with watertight compartments designed to isolate flooding in the event of a breach. Had the ship collided head-on, only the first 3 or 4 compartments would have been flooded, potentially saving the ship and countless lives. Proponents of this theory place the blame for the disaster on First Officer William Murdoch. Immense, fast-moving ships cannot execute turns in mere seconds like a speeding car. It requires minutes to alter course. When Murdoch realized that a collision was unavoidable, he attempted a sharp turn to port, hoping to avoid a direct impact. Despite his efforts, the ship still collided with the iceberg. And as they say, you know the rest. Imagine, if you will, the chilling hours of April 15th, 1912. At 2:15 a.m., disaster strikes. A deafening crunch as the seemingly invincible RMS Titanic collides with a colossal iceberg. Just 3 minutes later, at 2:18 a.m., the lights flicker and die, plunging the Grand Liner into darkness. The ship groans, tilting precariously to a 45-degree angle, a terrifying sign of its impending doom. Then, with agonizing speed, the Titanic begins its final desperate plunge into the crushing depths of the Atlantic. By 2:20 a.m., a mere 5 minutes after the initial impact, the unthinkable happens. The RMS Titanic, the pride of the White Star Line, vanishes beneath the waves, swallowed whole by the unforgiving ocean. The mighty vessel, the epitome of Edwardian engineering, does not break apart. It descends in one colossal piece. It seems impossible, doesn't it? In April of 1912, the Titanic wasn't just the largest ship afloat, it was the most massive ship ever constructed. How could such a behemoth simply slip beneath the surface without fracturing? It's easy to understand the initial skepticism. Before the discovery of the wreckage, theories were scarce. But hold on a moment. Were they really? In the immediate aftermath of the catastrophe, the survivors, still reeling from the trauma, gave their accounts. They recounted the horrifying events, and some vividly claimed that the ship had indeed broken in two as it succumbed to the icy waters. Among them was Jack Thayer, a 17-year-old who meticulously described the sinking as he remembered it. L.D. Skidmore, based on Thayer's chilling description, even created a sketch. The drawing starkly depicted the ship snapping in half, a horrifying image. Yet in the absence of concrete proof, Jack and the other witnesses were largely dismissed. Their claims were met with doubt. But in 1985, everything changed. The first breakup theory was about to be vindicated. Robert Ballard, after decades of searching, located the final resting place of the Titanic, miles beneath the ocean surface. The discovery of the wreckage revealed a shocking truth. Jack and the other survivors had been right all along. The Titanic, in its death throes, had indeed broken apart. A new theory emerged, one that painted a gruesome picture of the final moments. At 2:15 a.m., the keel, the ship's spine, finally gives way, unable to withstand the immense strain. The starboard list, the tilt to the right, lessens momentarily as the hull buckles and crumbles. Then, at 2:17 a.m., the galley sections, weakened and stressed, detach from the main structure. The massive funnels, no longer supported, plummet into the dark abyss. The lights flicker and die, casting the scene into utter darkness. The stern, now unsupported, is violently pulled into the air, rising high above the waves in a macabre display. The bow section, its connection severed, begins its inexorable descent to the ocean floor. The aft section, barely clinging to the starboard side of the stern superstructure, lists slowly to port as it, too, begins to sink once more. In its final moments, the stern rises one last time, pivoting in a semicircle as it disappears beneath the waves. It all sounds plausible, doesn't it? A neat and tidy explanation. But as time passed, cracks began to appear in this theory as well. Doubters questioned whether the Titanic could have remained intact until it reached such an extreme angle. The breakup, they argued, would have had to commence much earlier in the sinking process. This realization opened up a vast new field for research and speculation, and so alternative scenarios began to emerge. Let's examine some of the less credible ones, theories that have largely been discredited, theories such as the V-break and the Aaron 1912 Vreak. According to the initial breakup theory, the Titanic reached an extreme angle, and the sheer weight of its unsupported stern caused it to fracture from the top down. But physics simply doesn't support this scenario. So, what other ideas were put forward? In 2006, Roger Long, a naval architect, proposed a so-called V theory. In this version of events, at 2:17 a.m., the breakup begins at a shallow angle, perhaps as little as 11 degrees. The upper structure, weakened by the initial impact and the subsequent flooding, begins to fail and crack. At this point, only the double bottom, the ship's reinforced underbelly, is holding the Titanic together. But it too begins to buckle under the immense strain, sealing the ship's fate. Water pours through the widening crack, further increasing the weight between the two sections. This added weight causes the Titanic to bend in the opposite direction, contorting the ship into a shape resembling the letter V. The upper decks are mangled and crushed together. The bow plunges towards the bottom, while the stern is the last section to disappear beneath the surface. However, this theory has been repeatedly disproven. Roger Long's belief was based on the mangled and crushed edges of the upper decks in the Titanic's bow section. However, experts now understand that this damage was caused by the hydraulic downburst, the immense force of the water crashing onto the deck as the Titanic slammed into the ocean floor. Another variation of the V-break theory posited that the bow rose out of the water after the break. This theory was championed by a former Titanic enthusiast. But not only has this idea been deemed physically impossible due to the bow's enormous mass, but it was also based on flawed information. Remember Jack Thayer and his sketch? Well, this particular theory heavily relied on his drawing and the accounts of a few other passengers. But the truth is, none of them actually witnessed the Titanic breaking apart in this manner. Jack himself admitted in an interview that the sketch was taken completely out of context. It was drawn by a passenger on the Carpathia, the ship that responded to the Titanic's distress call and rushed to its aid. As such, it simply couldn't be used as reliable evidence. The official cause of the Titanic disaster, collision with an iceberg, or so we've always been told. But recent research has cast doubt on this long-held belief. Was the iceberg truly the sole culprit in the demise of the biggest ship of its time? Imagine a colossal marvel of engineering, the Titanic, gracing the surface of the vast Atlantic. It seems impossible that such a gigantic and expensive creation could be brought down by something as seemingly insignificant as an iceberg. But what if the iceberg wasn't the sole culprit? For more than 3 decades, journalist Sinan Molani has been consumed by the mystery of the Titanic's sinking. Through relentless investigation, he unearthed a shocking discovery that rewrites the narrative we thought we knew. Molani stumbled upon a massive, 30-foot-long black mark etched onto the hull of the Titanic. This wasn't discovered in some dusty archive, but in a previously unpublished album filled with photographs documenting the ship's construction and preparation for its maiden and final voyage. Incredibly, it appears a fire had been raging within the Titanic for a full 3 weeks before anyone even took notice. Can you fathom that? The extreme heat emanating from this blaze compromised the integrity of the steel, weakening it by a staggering 75%. This critical flaw is the reason the iceberg was able to tear such a fatal gash in the ship's side. Had the fire not occurred, the Titanic might have shrugged off the impact. The iceberg, it seems, struck the precise location where the metal had been weakened. This is but one strand in a web of unbelievable coincidences that sealed the Titanic's fate. Those in command of the Titanic were aware of the fire. They understood the peril, yet they were unwilling to delay departure, fearing financial ruin. A coal shortage, fueled by striking miners, complicated matters further. The ship was fully booked, and alternatives were scarce. Other vessels were canceling voyages due to lack of demand, but everyone clamored to be aboard the Titanic. So, the management team desperately bought up every available piece of coal, even taking stores from other ships, and pressed forward. Profit, it seemed, trumped all else. To conceal the damage, they rotated the ship, concealing the scorched marks from the view of onlookers on the dock. This way, the arriving passengers remained blissfully unaware. Here's another tragic twist in the Titanic saga. In that era, sonar was non-existent. Instead, specially trained lookouts relied on binoculars to scan the horizon for danger. But the binoculars aboard the Titanic were locked away, and the key was in the possession of Second Officer David Blair. In a last-minute shuffle, Blair was removed from the crew just before departure. In the chaos, he forgot to hand over the crucial key to his replacement. This oversight went unnoticed for 3 agonizing days. Had those binoculars been accessible, the iceberg might have been spotted in time and disaster averted. Even with binoculars, avoiding the collision might have been impossible. The Titanic was exceeding its design speed. Desperate to make up for lost time and preserve the ship's reputation, they pushed the engines beyond their safe limits. One of the most significant blunders was the insufficient number of lifeboats. While the ship required approximately 60 to accommodate all passengers and crew, it carried a mere 20. The original design by Alexander Carlisle included 48 lifeboats, but this number was slashed for purely aesthetic reasons. Too many lifeboats, it was argued, would clutter the deck and spoil the ship's elegant lines. These 20 boats could only hold about a third of those on board, a tragically inadequate number in the face of catastrophe. What's truly appalling is that this meager number of lifeboats technically met the legal requirements of the time. Regulations were based on the ship's tonnage, not the number of passengers it carried. The Titanic, despite carrying thousands of souls, satisfied the existing flawed regulations. Adding to the litany of errors, the crew made the fateful decision to cancel the lifeboat drill scheduled for the very day of the disaster. Such drills were standard practice on ocean liners, but for reasons that remain unclear, Captain Edward John Smith chose to forego it. As a result, passengers were unprepared for the emergency, and the crew lacked the necessary training to respond effectively. When the Titanic struck the iceberg, chaos erupted. Instead of the planned 10 minutes, it took over half an hour to launch the lifeboats. Some placed the blame squarely on Captain Smith for the fact that the first lifeboats left the ship partially empty. The very first lifeboat, capable of holding 65 people, departed with only 27 aboard. There's a reason for this. Initially, people were hesitant to leave the seemingly unsinkable ship, failing to grasp the direness of the situation. In 2012, researchers made another stunning discovery. Captain Smith had failed his initial navigation exam. Though he later passed, questions linger about whether this early failing contributed to the unfolding tragedy. Imagine the scene. The North Atlantic, a cold, unforgiving expanse of water. It's April 1912, and a disaster is unfolding. The Titanic, a ship of dreams, is sinking. In those desperate final moments, the crew frantically sends out distress signals, hoping against hope that someone will hear their cries. Among the ships within range was the Californian. But tragically, the Californian failed to respond to the flares bursting in the night sky. The captain of the Californian, wrongly accused of negligence, paid the ultimate price, his career. But now, Years later, the truth emerges. Recent research has finally exonerated the captain, proving his innocence. It wasn't negligence, but a cruel trick of nature. Light refraction, caused by layers of cold air trapped beneath warmer air, created mirages that distorted the signals from the Titanic. It was a phenomenon observed by other ships in the area, a silent, invisible force that played a deadly role in the tragedy. Even the lookouts on the Titanic itself were deceived by this atmospheric anomaly, causing them to miss the iceberg until it was too late. Historian Tim Moulton's research supports this theory, shedding new light on the events of that fateful night. It's a tragedy that the captain of the Californian suffered for so long, a victim of circumstance. But at least his name has been cleared, and the truth, however delayed, has come to light. The sinking of the Titanic continues to fascinate and perplex scientists and historians to this day. But what was it about this ship that captured the world's imagination? What made the Titanic so unique? Let's journey back in time and explore this magnificent vessel. The Titanic was a behemoth, a floating city, standing 175 feet tall and stretching nearly 900 feet in length. Its sheer size was overwhelming. Even seasoned officers needed over 2 weeks to memorize the layout of its decks and passageways. Imagine walking miles through its corridors, a labyrinth of luxury and engineering. The construction cost was a staggering $7,500,000, equivalent to approximately $166 million in today's money. Interestingly, the production cost of the 1997 Titanic movie was even higher, exceeding $200 million. Building the Titanic was an immense undertaking, requiring a workforce of 3,000 men working 6 days a week for 26 long months. The work was arduous and perilous, with workers performing tasks high above the ground, the equivalent of a 20-story building, often without safety ropes. Yet, they earned a competitive wage of $2 a week, considered a respectable sum at the time. The interior of the Titanic was inspired by the opulent Ritz Hotel in London, a testament to luxury and refinement. The centerpiece was the grand staircase, a marvel of design that spanned 7 of the ship's 10 decks. Adorned with ornate paintings, bronze cherubs, and rich oak paneling, it was a sight to behold. First-class passengers enjoyed an unparalleled array of amenities, including a heated swimming pool, a Turkish bath, a state-of-the-art gymnasium, a squash court, a beauty salon, and even a personal stylist to ensure they were perfectly prepared for dinner. Life in first class on the Titanic was one of extraordinary pampering. Passengers had their own onboard newspaper, the Atlantic Daily Bulletin, keeping them informed of the latest news. Even their dogs were treated like royalty, with a dedicated area for feeding, walking, and training during the voyage. The first-class meals were lavish affairs, featuring 13 courses, each paired with a different wine. These dinners could last up to 5 hours, a true indulgence for the senses. With such unparalleled opulence and luxury, it's no wonder that so many people were eager to embark on the Titanic's maiden voyage. "I'll never let go, Jack," Rose famously declared. But she did, and countless moviegoers wept. The 1997 film, Titanic, cemented the tragedy in popular culture, but how much of it was real? As much as it may disappoint fans, the love story between Jack and Rose was a work of fiction, dreamed up by James Cameron. There was a J. Dawson on board the Titanic, but his full name was Joseph, and he was a member of the crew. The inspiration for Rose came from the American artist Beatrice Wood. Cameron discovered her biography while writing the script and incorporated her love for art and family background into the character. Despite the fictional romance, the movie does capture many historical details accurately. The unsinkable ship did indeed depart from Southampton, England, bound for New York. It was approximately 400 miles south of Newfoundland on April 14th when the crew spotted the fateful iceberg. The collision lasted a mere 37 seconds, mirroring the length of the corresponding scene in the film. And Thomas Andrews, the quiet, thoughtful man sketching in his notebook? He was indeed the ship's designer. Andrews was a gifted naval architect who had worked on many successful projects before the Titanic. He typically sailed on the maiden voyages of the ships he designed to ensure everything ran smoothly, and he boarded the Titanic as a first-class passenger. Andrews, ever the diligent shipbuilder, was constantly observing and taking notes. Even after the disastrous encounter with the iceberg, witnesses saw him alongside Captain Smith, meticulously inspecting the flooded compartments. His grim assessment predicted the Titanic would succumb to the icy depths in approximately 2 hours. A steward later testified to seeing Thomas Andrews in the ship's final moments. He had made the conscious decision to remain with the Titanic, refusing a lifebelt. He was never seen again. Music. Another poignant scene from the film depicts a young boy playing on deck with his spinning top. This wasn't mere cinematic invention. It was a faithful recreation of an actual photograph taken aboard the Titanic on April 11, 1912. The subjects of the photo were first-class passengers, Frederick Spedden and his 6-year-old son, Douglas. The family was returning to America after a journey through Algeria. As the evacuation commenced, young Douglas was told by his nurse that they were going to look at the stars. Remarkably, he slept soundly through the entire ordeal, awakening safe and unharmed in a lifeboat the next morning. His father also survived the sinking. Tragically, Douglas's life was cut short just 3 years later in an automobile accident. One of the Titanic's most memorable personalities, both on screen and in reality, earned the moniker Unsinkable Molly Brown for a compelling reason. Numerous survivors recalled her tireless efforts to persuade others in her lifeboat to return and rescue more passengers. Just as depicted in the film's heart-wrenching scene when the Carpathia arrived to rescue the survivors, Margaret Brown was actively assisting lower-class passengers and engaging her fellow first-class travelers in the rescue efforts. Once ashore, Brown spearheaded the formation of a survivors committee. She presented an award to the captain of the Carpathia for his heroic rescue efforts and was reportedly incensed at being barred from testifying at the Titanic hearings simply because she was a woman. In the movie, you'll notice the absence of exhaust fumes emanating from the ship's fourth funnel. This isn't an oversight. The Titanic's fourth funnel was purely for aesthetic purposes. It wasn't actually functional. Back in 1911, the year before the Titanic's ill-fated voyage, large ships typically featured 4 funnels. These were essential for venting heat and fumes from their massive boilers. However, the Titanic was a marvel of engineering, requiring only 3 funnels for operation. The 4th was added to maintain visual symmetry. The shipbuilders believed the public would be underwhelmed by a vessel of such grandeur sporting only 3 funnels. The film boasted an impressive budget of $200 million, yet even that wasn't limitless. Director James Cameron had to make strategic cost-saving decisions. Consequently, the liner's replica was constructed only on the starboard, or right side. This choice was made to enhance realism. The prevailing winds at the filming location blew from north to south, creating the illusion that the liner was indeed sailing through the ocean as the fumes streamed out. However, a problem arose when filming the initial scenes of the Titanic departing from Southampton, with crowds waving farewell. The real ship had been docked on the port, or left, side. The filmmakers devised an ingenious solution. They simply flipped the scene horizontally in post-production to achieve a realistic depiction. This meant reversing letters and buttons on costumes and having actors walk in the opposite direction, all to be corrected later. One of the film's most emotionally devastating scenes depicts an elderly couple embracing as the Titanic sinks. This scene was inspired by a real-life couple among the wealthiest passengers aboard the ill-fated ship. Isidore and Ida Strauss, the owners of Macy's department store. As news of the disaster spread, they donned life jackets and rushed to the decks with the other passengers. Ida boarded a lifeboat, but Isidore refused to do so, insisting that all the women and children be saved first. Unwilling to leave her husband's side, Ida stepped back out of the lifeboat and handed her mink coat to her maid, declaring she would no longer need it. Isidore embraced Ida, and they remained on the ship's bridge until a massive wave swept them both into the sea. So, the bed scene wasn't that accurate, and James Cameron later admitted he had taken some license as a director. Remember the man taking swigs from a flask near the main characters as the ship went down? That was Charles Jowan from England, and he was in charge of 10 bakers, 2 confectioners, and a Vienna baker aboard the Titanic. He was looking forward to earning a substantial sum and would have been among the highest-paid crew members had the voyage gone as planned. The night the iceberg struck, Jowan was off duty, finally getting some rest,